Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving into something today that might seem kind of dry at first glance.
Oh, yeah.
New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law.
Okay.
Yeah. You've given us a whole stack of documents about this, and our mission is to help make sense of it all, but in a way that's actually engaging, you know?
Right.
We'll cut through the legal jargon and pull out the most important stuff so that by the end of this, you'll be able to hold your own in conversations about zoning and variances.
Yeah, that's good.
All that good stuff. Who knows? You might even impress your neighbors at the next town meeting.
Well, what's interesting here is that these laws aren't just abstract rules. They really shape our towns and neighborhoods, you know?
Yeah.
Understanding them gives you an advantage in seeing how decisions are made about development and what gets built, where and why.
Okay, so let's start with the basics then. We've got to define some key terms.
All right.
Some might seem pretty obvious, like municipal resident, which basically means you live in the town.
It does sound simple.
Right.
That residency status affects so many things.
Really?
Like voting rights, eligibility for certain permits,
Okay.
even how much you pay for the local pool.
Wow. Okay.
It's really the foundation of your relationship with the municipality.
Okay, so residency really matters.
It does.
All right, now here's a term that might be a little more intriguing.
Right.
Non-conforming lot or non-conforming structure.
Okay.
What exactly does that mean?
Well, imagine your grandfather built a house 50 years ago.
Okay.
That was perfectly legal at the time. Then the town adopts a new zoning ordinance.
Oh, right.
That says houses can't be so close to the property line.
Okay.
So suddenly, your grandfather's house is non-conforming.
Oh.
Because it doesn't meet the new rules.
So it's like a little piece of the past.
Yeah, you could say that.
Frozen in time by zoning.
Right.
What happens then? Can they make him tear it down?
Not necessarily. This can actually be a real advantage for property owners. Imagine trying to build that close to the property line today.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be allowed to.
Right.
But because your grandfather's house is grandfathered in, it holds this unique value. There are special rules about what you can and can't do with a non-conforming structure.
Interesting.
And navigating those can be quite important for property owners.
That makes sense. It's like having a rare vintage car.
Yeah.
It might not meet today's standards, but it's valuable precisely because of that.
Exactly.
All right, now let's talk about planned development.
Okay.
This one sounds pretty self-explanatory, but I have a feeling there's more to it than meets the eye.
You're right. Planned development in New Jersey isn't just about drawing up some landscaping plans.
Oh, really?
It covers several specific categories like planned industrial development or planned unit development.
Got it.
These usually involve a larger area developed as a single project, often with a mix of residential, commercial, or even industrial uses, all designed to work together.
So think like a big apartment complex with shocks on the ground floor.
Exactly.
Like a mini self-contained community.
Right.
I can see why there would be specific rules around those.
These developments can have a significant impact on a town.
Yeah.
So there need to be clear guidelines for how they're planned and approved.
Okay.
It's not just about what you build, but also how it affects everyone around you.
That leads us to the next term, standards of performance.
All right.
This sounds a bit like a school report card for buildings.
It's more about how the use of your property impacts your neighbors.
Okay.
These standards cover things like noise levels, controlling smells, and even screening unsightly objects.
Wow.
They can get incredibly specific, and towns have the power to enforce them.
So even if you're following all the rules about what you can build, your town can still step in.
Right.
If, say, your dream backyard metalworking forge is creating a racket and a smoke plume that bothers the neighbors.
Precisely. It's all about striking that balance between your right to use your property and ensuring it doesn't negatively impact the community around you.
Like a community-wide game of not in my backyard.
You could say.
But with actual legal teeth.
Right.
All right, let's move on to a few more terms that seem basic but have some hidden depths.
Okay.
First up, streets. Now, I might not be a legal expert, but I'm pretty sure I know what a street is.
Well, in this context, streets isn't just the paved road.
Oh.
It actually encompasses all the elements in between.
Like what?
The sidewalks,
okay,
the curbs, even parking areas.
So it's more like a whole ecosystem of transportation infrastructure, not just the road itself. I'm starting to see how seemingly simple terms can have much broader implications in this world.
That broad definition of streets is important because it impacts who's responsible for maintenance.
Oh, okay.
Think potholes,
Yeah.
sidewalk repairs, snow removal.
Oh, okay.
Knowing who's in charge of those things can be crucial.
Right. Especially new developments.
Exactly.
Or when issues arise. Okay, that's a good point. You don't want to be stuck in a situation where nobody's taking responsibility for a crumbling sidewalk in front of your house.
Exactly.
Speaking of things in front of your house, let's talk about structures.
Okay.
It seems pretty straightforward, but I bet there's a legal twist here too.
You're right. Legally speaking, a structure is broader than just a house.
Oh.
It includes anything built for occupancy, use, or even ornamentation.
So that garden shed in your backyard, or even that fancy gazebo you've always wanted.
Yeah.
Those might technically be considered structures under the law, subject to certain regulations.
That's right.
Wow, so even my humble shed has legal status.
It does.
I never thought of it that way. All right, one last term for this round. Subdivision. I'm guessing this is about dividing a piece of land into smaller pieces, usually for selling or developing, right?
That's the basic idea. But there are some exceptions.
Oh.
For instance, if you're a farmer and you divide your land, but don't create any new streets, that might not be considered a subdivision under the law.
So even the seemingly simple act of dividing land can have legal nuances.
Absolutely.
Depending on the circumstances. It's fascinating how much complexity lies beneath the surface of these seemingly straightforward terms.
And that's why understanding these definitions is so crucial. They're not just words.
Right.
They're the keys to unlocking the entire system of New Jersey land use law.
Okay, so now that we've laid the foundation with these key definitions, let's shift gears and talk about how things actually get done in this world.
Okay.
Who are the key players involved in making decisions about land use?
There are several important actors, but two groups really stand out.
Okay.
The Planning Board and the Zoning Board of Adjustment.
Got it.
The Planning Board is a group of appointed residents.
Appointed residents. So these are folks from the community.
That's right.
Not necessarily legal experts.
Right. They're your neighbors, essentially. But they have significant authority when it comes to land use.
Really?
They review development regulations, advise on master plans.
Okay.
And can grant approvals for things like subdivisions and site plans.
So if someone wants to build a new housing development or put up a shopping center, they'd need to go through the planning board.
Exactly. And then there's the Zoning Board of Adjustment. This is where things get interesting.
Interesting. How so?
This is where you go if you need a bit of flexibility in how the rules are applied.
Flexibility, you mean like bending the rules? I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Think of it this way. The Zoning Board of Adjustment is where you go if you need what's called a variance.
Okay.
Basically an exception to the strict zoning rules. They also hear appeals of decisions made by the zoning officer.
So if the zoning rules say you can't build a certain type of structure on your property, you can appeal to the zoning board and see if they'll make an exception.
That's the general idea, but it's not a free pass.
Right.
You have to demonstrate that there are valid reasons why the variance should be granted, and the board has to weigh your request against the potential impact on the community.
Sounds like the zoning board has a lot of power to shape what happens in a town.
They do.
But before they make any decisions, there's a crucial step, right?
Oh, yeah.
Public notice.
You're absolutely right. Before any major decisions are made, the town has to properly notify residents.
Okay.
This means posting notices and even sending letters to nearby property owners.
Okay.
Usually at least 10 days before a hearing.
So this is where things get real for our listeners.
Yes.
You have the opportunity to be informed and voice your opinions before decisions are made.
That's right.
Don't sit on the sidelines, get involved.
Exactly.
But what happens if you disagree with a decision made by either board? Is there any recourse?
That's where the appeals process comes in.
Okay.
If you disagree with a planning board or zoning board decision, you have the right to appeal. However, there are very specific procedures and deadlines you have to follow.
So you can't just storm into the next meeting and demand a do-over. There's a formal process to follow.
Exactly. For example, with a zoning board decision, you might only have 10 days to file an appeal with the governing body.
Wow. Okay.
Missing that deadline could mean losing your right to challenge the decision.
It sounds like there are a lot of rules within the rules.
There are.
So it's important to be aware of the procedures and deadlines if you want to have your voice heard.
Absolutely.
Speaking of procedures, there's something called the rule of necessity that I've heard about. What's that all about?
Now, this rule is quite interesting.
Okay.
It essentially means that if everyone on a board has a conflict of interest in a particular case, they can still hear the case.
Oh, wow. So even with a conflict of interest.
If everyone has a conflict, they can still hear it.
Okay.
Otherwise, nothing would ever get done.
That makes sense. You wouldn't want the entire land use system to grind to a halt.
Exactly.
Just because a few people have a conflict.
Right.
It's like the old saying, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, from defining key terms to understanding the major players involved in the decision-making process.
Right.
But what happens when those rules are just too rigid? What if you need a little bit of wiggle room?
That's where we get into the fascinating world of variances and exceptions.
Okay.
These are the tools that allow for flexibility within the system. And they're often at the heart of some of the most contentious land use debates.
That sounds like a great place to pick up after a quick break.
Sounds good to me.
We'll be right back to dive deeper into these variances and how they can impact development in your town. Don't go anywhere.
We'll be right here.
All right, we're back and ready to tackle this wild world of variances.
Okay.
These are the exceptions to the zoning rules, right? The safety valves that allow for some flexibility in a system that can sometimes feel pretty rigid.
Yeah.
What kind of situations might call for a variance?
Well, one common scenario is when following the zoning rules would create a real hardship for a property owner.
Hardship. Huh.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty serious. What qualifies as a hardship in this context?
Right.
Is it just any inconvenience, or does it have to be something more substantial?
It's got to be something unique to that specific property.
Okay.
Not just a general annoyance that everyone in the zone might experience.
Okay.
For example, imagine you have a piece of land that's oddly shaped or has some unusual topographical features. If following the zoning rules would make it practically impossible to build anything on that land, you might be able to get a hardship variance.
So it's not just about making things easier for the property owner.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that sometimes the rules just don't fit the reality of a particular piece of land.
Exactly. The hardship variance is there to ensure that landowners aren't unfairly burdened by zoning rules that were designed for more typical situations.
Yeah, I've also heard about something called flexible C variances. What are those all about?
These are all about design standards.
Okay.
Things like the size and placement of buildings on a lot. You might need a flexible C variance if you want to deviate slightly from those standards.
Okay.
Again, due to the specific characteristics of your property.
So it's not just about what you can build, but how and where you can build it.
That's right.
These variances seem to offer a way to work within the system while still accounting for the unique aspects of a particular situation.
Right. They allow for a bit of give and take.
Yeah.
Ensuring that the zoning rules are applied in a way that makes sense.
Now, I know you mentioned that there are different types of variances.
Yeah.
And some are tougher to get than others.
That's right.
What about the special reasons variance, also known as the D variance? What makes this one so special, or should I say difficult?
Yes, the elusive D variance.
Okay.
This is the one you request when you want to do something
Yeah.
that's not normally allowed in that zoning district at all. Think of it like this. You want to open a small bakery in a residential zone.
Okay.
A place where homes are typically the only permitted use.
Right.
Normally that wouldn't fly.
No.
But a D variance is like asking for special permission
Okay.
because you believe your bakery would actually benefit the community in a unique way.
So it's not just about getting around the rules.
No.
It's about making a case for why bending the rules would serve a greater good.
Precisely. You have to demonstrate that there are very specific, compelling reasons why this exception should be made, and that it won't harm the overall character of the neighborhood.
It sounds like a high bar to clear.
It is.
What are the chances of actually getting a D variance approved?
They're definitely not easy to come by.
Really?
Not only do you need to meet a very high standard of proof,
Okay.
but you also need 5 affirmative votes from the Zoning Board of Adjustment.
So it's not just about convincing 1 or 2 people, you have to sway the majority of the board.
That's right. And that's why it's so important to build a strong case. The Zoning Board has to weigh the potential benefits of granting a variance
Okay.
against any potential harm it might cause to the community as a whole. For For example, with that bakery we talked about.
Yeah.
The board would have to consider whether the benefits of having fresh bread in a food desert
Right.
outweigh the potential downsides of allowing a commercial use in a residential zone.
It sounds like a complex balancing act.
It is.
On the one hand, you want to encourage development and allow for flexibility.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you don't want to erode the character of a neighborhood.
Right.
Or create unintended consequences. It's all about finding that sweet spot, right?
Exactly. And that's why these decisions can be so challenging.
Yeah.
And why it's so important for residents to understand the process and make their voices heard.
Speaking of things that benefit the community, I know that New Jersey law encourages certain practices that are considered good for towns and cities, like historic preservation and affordable housing.
Okay.
Let's talk about those for a bit.
All right.
What does historic preservation look like in the context of land use law?
Well, municipalities in New Jersey have the power to create historic preservation commissions and designate certain areas as historic districts or landmarks.
Okay.
This designation can have a big impact on what kinds of development are allowed and how those historic resources are protected.
So if your house happens to be in a historic district, you might not have as much freedom to renovate or make changes to the exterior.
That's right. It's all about preserving the character and heritage of our communities.
Okay.
There might be specific guidelines about the types of materials you can use, the colors you can paint your house, even the style of windows you can install.
Interesting.
It can seem restrictive.
Yeah.
But it's all in the service of protecting those irreplaceable historical assets.
I can see both sides of that.
Yeah.
It's important to preserve history, but I can also see how it could be frustrating for homeowners who want to make updates or personalize their properties.
Right.
It's that balance again, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's a balance that's constantly being negotiated as our towns and cities evolve.
Okay, so we've talked about preserving the past, but what about planning for the future?
Right.
What does New Jersey law have to say about affordable housing?
Affordable housing is a huge issue in New Jersey. And the state has a number of laws and programs aimed at encouraging the development of more affordable options. One interesting aspect of this is how the law addresses manufactured homes.
Manufactured homes, those are what used to be called mobile homes, right?
That's right.
How do those fit into the affordable housing picture?
They're often a more affordable option than traditional site-built homes.
Okay.
And New Jersey law actually prevents towns from using zoning to discriminate against manufactured homes that meet certain standards.
So towns can't just ban them outright or relegate them to undesirable areas?
That's right.
They have to be treated more like traditional homes.
Exactly. They have to be allowed in areas where similar types of housing are permitted.
Okay.
This is all part of a broader effort to promote diversity in housing options and ensure that people from all income levels have access to decent, safe, and affordable places to live.
That makes sense. It's about expanding the range of choices.
Right.
And recognizing that manufactured homes can be a viable solution for many people. Now, while we're on the topic of innovative approaches to land use, there's a program called Transfer of Development Rights, or TDR, that I'd like to learn more about. What's the deal with TDR?
TDR is a fascinating program that's designed to balance preservation with development.
Okay.
It allows landowners in sending zones, typically areas where development is restricted, like farmland or environmentally sensitive areas, to sell their development rights to developers in receiving zones, which are usually areas where more intensive development is desired.
So instead of building on that beautiful piece of farmland, the landowner can sell those development rights to someone who wants to build a taller building in the downtown area, for example.
Exactly.
It's like moving development potential from one place to another.
That's a great way to put it.
And this program has safeguards built in to ensure that it's done responsibly.
It does.
There has to be a comprehensive plan in place that identifies appropriate sending and receiving zones. And there must be opportunities for public input throughout the process.
That's right.
It's not just a free-for-all.
Right.
That's a really cool concept. It seems like a win-win, allowing for development in areas where it makes sense, while also protecting valuable resources in other areas. I'm really impressed by the creativity and thought that goes into some of these land use programs.
It's a complex field,
Yeah.
but it's also incredibly important. These decisions have a real impact on our communities. And it's essential for residents to be informed and engaged in the process.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the nitty-gritty of definitions to the high-level concepts, like variances, historic preservation, and affordable housing.
Right.
It's clear that New Jersey land use law is a multifaceted and constantly evolving system.
Absolutely. And we've only just scratched the surface. There's a wealth of information out there for those who want to dive deeper.
Yeah.
And we encourage you to do so.
Well, before we encourage everyone to go off and read zoning ordinances in their spare time, let's take a moment to recap some of the key takeaways from our deep dive.
Right.
Then we can leave our listeners with some final thoughts to ponder. What do you say?
Sounds like a plan. Let's bring it all together.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap of what we've learned about navigating the sometimes complicated world of New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law.
Okay.
We started with the basics, like defining terms that maybe seemed simple at first, but then we found out they have hidden depths.
Yeah, like non-conforming lots.
Yeah, exactly.
And standards of performance.
Yeah, those aren't just words.
No, they're not.
They're like the building blocks of how development happens in your town.
They are, and it's not enough to just know the definitions.
Right.
You have to understand how they play out in real-life scenarios.
Yeah, that's why we explored those fascinating cases. Like, those variances were a real eye-opener for me. They show how the system can adapt to unique situations and balance the needs of property owners with the broader interests of the community.
It's all about finding that sweet spot.
Exactly.
And it's not just about reacting to development proposals either.
Oh, yeah.
Residents have the power to proactively shape their communities by participating in the planning process.
Right. Earlier, we talked about the importance of public notice and the appeals process. Those are crucial avenues for residents to make their voices heard.
Absolutely. Public hearings are your chance to learn about what's being proposed.
Okay.
Ask tough questions and voice your concerns.
Oh.
Don't be afraid to speak up.
Yeah, don't be shy.
And if you disagree with a decision, you can appeal it.
Right.
But remember, there are specific procedures and deadlines to follow.
So it's not just about showing up and yelling at the board members.
No, it's not.
There's a system in place.
Yeah.
And it's important to understand how it works.
Knowledge is power.
Right. And there are tons of resources available to help you gain that knowledge. Like, your town's website is often a great starting point.
Yeah, you can usually find meeting minutes, zoning ordinances, even the master plan, all online.
So you can really see how things work from the comfort of your own home.
Right.
And if you can't find what you're looking for online, don't hesitate to reach out to your elected officials or planning board members directly.
Yeah, they're there to represent you.
Right.
And they should be willing to answer your questions.
So this isn't some shadowy, secretive process.
No, it's not.
It's your town, your community, and you have the right to be informed and involved.
Exactly.
So the next time you see a new development going up in your town, or you hear about a zoning dispute, don't just shrug it off.
No.
Think about what we've learned in this deep dive.
Right.
And consider how you can make your voice heard.
These aren't just abstract legal concepts.
Right.
They have a real impact on your daily life, your neighborhood, the places where you live, work, and play.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic takeaway. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the intricacies of variances to the big picture ideas like historic preservation, affordable housing, and even the innovative transfer of development rights program.
It's a complex field, but it's also fascinating.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's about shaping the future of our communities.
And that's a future we can all play a role in creating.
Absolutely.
So go forth, dear listeners, armed with your newfound knowledge of New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law.
That's right.
And make your town a better place.
We will see you next time on The Deep Dive.